All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we are back for another Bokeh Podcast episode and a brand new guest, Karissa. Now, Karissa, I'm going to try this for the first time out loud. Your last name is Hundsaker, is that correct?
Yes, that's it.
Okay, perfect. We got it. Karissa is here to hang out with us and talk about how to capture emotion in your clients. This is not a topic we've dug into a whole lot on the show, and we put a lot of episodes out there. So I appreciate you making time to share on this topic with us today, Karissa. We're going to get to that here in just a little bit. But first question for you, we're just going to jump right in.
Okay.
You're a Southern, and actually on your Instagram bio, for everybody listening in, if you go to Karissa, Karissa Layne photo, Layne photo, we'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But you say you're a Southern California, Colorado, Florida photographer. You kind of move around a lot, huh?
I do move around a lot. My husband's in the military.
Okay.
So yeah, it works for me. I kind of have home in different places. So.
Well, and you mentioned to me before we started recording that you travel a good bit. Do you enjoy that?
I do enjoy it. Yeah. Sometimes, like I was telling you earlier, it's good to kind of have a routine and be able to really work. But I love seeing different places and getting to see my family all over. So it's good.
Well, it probably brings quite a bit of variety too, which is something like if I'm not traveling, a lot of the times I'm sitting in my apartment. Right now I'm sitting in my apartment at a desk,
yes.
Recording this, and it can be in some ways a bit lonely, if you're not out
yes.
actually connecting or moving. So I welcome the variety that comes from travel, and I can imagine that can be inspirational for you as well. But
yes, actually, my favorite place to work is on an airplane. It's so weird, but yeah. I love it. I can get so much work done sitting there on the plane. It's my favorite.
Well, I think it kind of creates some limitations in the most positive way possible, right? Like you're stuck in one place. You don't necessarily have internet access, and you've got that computer right in front of you. Yeah. It enables a certain amount of focus and getting work done, which I think can be really great.
Yes, absolutely.
That's cool. Well, talk to me first about customer experience. This is a relatively new question we began asking this year. Is there a particular principle that you've found effective in providing a wonderful customer experience to your clients?
Yeah, so I think honest enthusiasm. And what I mean by that is just really caring about your customers and making sure that they know that you care about them. I think the best businesses are ones that, it's not just about like money and transactions and sales. It's like they actually care about you and they're here for you and to serve you. So that's what I try to do with my customers. And yeah, just being really enthusiastic for them and about what's going on in their life. So
there are two things that stand out to me in this, and I'm glad that you bring this up. One, you talk about enthusiasm. And I don't know if you notice this, but anytime you meet, or I shouldn't say anytime, a lot of times, if not most times, that you meet somebody, they don't know you, there is a tendency for people to be guarded, right? Which
yes.
So they don't tend to be especially enthusiastic or especially happy. They're a bit guarded initially. Maybe they begin to warm up as they get to know you and they let their guard down just a little bit. But anytime you have the opportunity to meet somebody that actually shows enthusiasm or excitement, that you can actually see happiness in their eyes as they're beginning to have a conversation with you. I don't know about you, but that just makes me feel good.
Yeah, for sure. I'm actually going to be talking about that a little bit later, but
I think it's really powerful that, and it takes a little bit of an effort. And for those who might consider themselves introverts, they have to learn how to step beyond that label and even limitation, if you will. But ultimately, showing a certain level of enthusiasm can really make a big difference, especially in that first impression. So I'm glad that you bring that up. When you talk about showing or caring for somebody, what reminds, or something that comes to mind ultimately, is something we talk about here on the podcast a decent amount, the significance of adding value. I was listening to Gary Vaynerchuk again, and he was emphasizing this very point that much of his focus is on adding value to the people that consume his content. And that ultimately will come back to pay dividends. I mean, his company is doing well for multiple reasons, but the fact that he's gained so much notoriety is largely as a result of his focus on adding value. If we go into a potential relationship with a client with a focus on, first of all, kindness and enthusiasm, as you pointed out, but then adding value to their life, figuring out how you can make their life better and serving them to that end, again, there's an opportunity to create just an amazing relationship and ultimately an amazing experience for that client. And so I'm really glad that you highlight that.
Yeah, for sure. I think sometimes it's easy to forget that our business is actually like, I'm here to serve other people.
Yeah.
This business really has nothing to do with me. Like, sure, I take the pictures, whatever, I'll post them. But ultimately, like, these are their memories to keep forever. Like, it really has nothing to do with me. So I think it's important to remember that.
Well, I'll leave it at that because I think you summed that up beautifully and very powerfully. Talk to me about brand position. And for anybody new to this concept, what we mean by brand position is the UVP, the unique value proposition your business offers to your market. Can you sum that up in a phrase or a sentence?
Yeah. So my brand position is capturing your marriage, not just your wedding day, and giving you photographs that reflect exactly who you are, their true to life color and emotion.
This is a really interesting one for multiple reasons. First of all, props to you for actually putting that position up front and center. I do have to scroll just beyond the fold of your homepage.
I'm actually working on that.
Okay, cool. So
I'm gonna figure it out.
Yeah, and that'll make it even more poignant because the potential client lands on your site and they see it right away. But what I was going to say is props to you for actually having it there front and center, or even having a position statement to begin with, but then having it there right after that header image, capturing your marriage, not just your wedding. Now, I can imagine different people might take that phrase or that sentence in a different way. What do you actually mean by it?
What I mean by it is I am really passionate about marriage. I love wedding photography because I think marriage is such a special thing. And hopefully no one will take offense to this. I don't mean for this to come across the wrong way, but sometimes I think in the wedding industry, there's just so many things going on, and people spend so much time planning all these details and spending a ton of money and on that sometimes I think we actually lose out on what the day's about, which is about their marriage.
Yeah, it's true.
And so it's just really important to me to make sure that my clients, the focus of their day is their marriage and that they remember that.
Interesting. So you're referencing then the connection, the relationship, and when you're saying marriage and not just the wedding, the kind of almost commercial event, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. Okay. Well, I first of all, again, props to you for even having a position statement. Secondly, communicating an idea that is certainly quite unique. I mean, I've certainly not seen it worded this way in any of the photographer's website that I can remember. I know that we've talked to one or two guests that have communicated the idea of focusing on helping the couple have a better relationship, but this is even unique to that. And so props to you again for coming up with something that's actually unique. And for everybody listening in, as much time as we spend on the brand position statement idea, and of course now we have dedicated episodes just toward that topic. There is a significant benefit that comes from being able to very quickly and succinctly communicate how you're different than anybody else. To be clear, it's only a piece of the puzzle, but it's an important piece. Make sure that if you've not established a clear brand position, that you've done so. And shout out to Anna in episode 345. She came on and did a brand position consultation. If you all haven't heard that yet, make sure you go listen because it'll give you more context to this conversation about what it means to create a clear and distinct brand position statement. And I'll leave that as is for now. I don't want to spend too much time there, but continuing on, talk to me about time management as a business owner, especially one, Karissa, who travels quite a bit. How do you effectively manage time where you can create space for yourself, the important people in your life, and simultaneously run an effective business?
Yeah, so I was kind of struggling to come up with a very clear answer to this. And it's definitely something I struggle with and I'm always working on it.
Okay.
But I realized that I always set aside 1 to 2 days a week just to take the day off.
Yeah.
But it definitely varies from week to week. I do really enjoy having a flexible schedule. That's something I love. So I try not to be strict with myself. I've actually tried like time blocking and different techniques, and they just don't really seem to work for me because I really like to be flexible and like maybe something comes up, so I go do that thing and then come back to something later. Okay. But that just works for me. So usually what I'll do is at the beginning of each week, I will write out the big tasks that need to get done that week. And then I'll kind of plan accordingly what I'm going to work on each day. And it's kind of more of it's not so structured. It's kind of more of like a general plan for my week. But then, yeah, I always make sure that I take 1 to 2 days off completely, turn off my computer, turn off my phone, everything, just fully be present with my husband or whatever. And that's the other thing is my husband has a varying schedule. So usually I try to kind of plan it according to when he has off as well. And then, yeah, the other thing was just having really realistic expectations of what I can get done. So when I'm writing out my list of tasks that needs to get completed that week, actually like, what can I actually realistically get done this week? What are like 5 things that I need to get done that I can get done this week, and not just like overloading myself with things?
That's an interesting one. I'm not sure that many, if anyone, many people have talked about that on the podcast. I have a tendency of, I guess, creating expectations that are just not realistic. I think I could get more done in a shorter amount of time than I effectively can. And then,
same. I'm working on it.
Well, then if I give myself too much to do, then I'm ultimately stressed out and potentially going to stress other people out. And that's just not a great place to exist. So that's a really great reminder. I'm curious though, you said you have a tendency, like you enjoy kind of having the flexibility of doing this thing and that thing. If something comes up, you go do that. Do you ever find that that's distracting in your workflow?
Okay, I should be more clear about that. I guess what I mean by that is at the beginning of the week, I might see a list of things like, oh, my friend invited me to do this on Tuesday afternoon. I'm going to let myself go do that with her. And that might mean that on Wednesday, I have to work longer or get up earlier Tuesday and work an extra hour in the morning. Does that make sense? So kind of changing week to week. I didn't mean being so all over the place, but kind of being with my schedule. Yeah. From week to week. So yeah. And actually with that being said, I just thought of something that's really helpful is to really focus on one thing at a time. So sometimes I'll almost do one thing all day long. Like maybe I'll just edit all day long on Wednesday and I won't do anything else. And that helps a lot too, to keep your mind just focused.
Or you can always just outsource your editing. For sure. I'm giving you a hard time. No, that the focusing on one thing is, a lot of people I think argue that they can't, or they say that they're great multitaskers, or any number of excuses might come up. But the reality is that at least most people will actually tend to get better work done more efficiently if they actually throw themselves into like truly focusing on one thing. And it's funny how you mentioned earlier being in a plane, it just naturally forces you to focus more effectively. It's interesting how suddenly, in certain situations, we find ourselves able to do so. So I think a lot of it's about setting environment. Certainly mindset is a big one as well. And focusing on one thing at a time can really, really make a big difference on multiple levels. So I'm glad that you point that out as well. Let's talk about delegation or outsourcing, though. I mentioned that a second ago, but are there certain things in your business that you outsource or delegate?
Yeah, well, funny timing because I am actually meeting with someone tomorrow. I'm kind of hiring her to be a little bit of a virtual assistant for me.
Cool.
So kind of just doing certain things like that I don't necessarily enjoy, I guess, to be honest.
Yeah.
A lot of like office tasks like blogging, bookkeeping, some marketing. And actually going back to what we just said, I realized that it's not even so much that these things take a lot of time, like maybe writing a blog post takes an hour a week or something, but it's kind of just when you have all these things on your brain, I think it's harder to get everything done because your brain's all over the place. And so I think it'll be helpful to just be able to focus on only half of the things in my business and just let someone else do the rest, if that makes sense. So yeah, I'm actually getting ready to do that. So I'm really excited about it. That's
perfect. And there's a pretty significant learning curve involved in the delegation process. You're probably going to find this too, even if you're just working with a VA a few hours a week, learning how, first of all, being clear. It's just so important to be clear what it is that you're actually trying to accomplish. I mean, personally on a big picture level. And then secondly, of course, that hopefully is trickling down to your business. It's going to affect what you're trying to get done in your business. And then ultimately helping you be clear about what it is that you can hand to somebody else so that you can focus on the things that you actually need to be involved in or that you care to be involved in. I love that you're taking that step. And I would encourage everybody to look for opportunities to do this. Believe it or not, myself, despite having owned Photographer's Edit now for 12 years, I am still learning. And it's a delegation. It's a company built around the idea of delegation and outsourcing. I'm still learning to be a better delegator. And I'm going to be working actively, actually, hopefully in the next few months, on growing our team, or at least restructuring it in certain ways so that I can more effectively delegate, so that I can focus more on the things that I'm especially good at, and ultimately that reflect my role at Photographers Edit and the podcast and now Milu. I need to do more of that. I'm realizing that. And so I'm going to continue to work at that, but it's a learning curve. And a lot of it centers around, one, being clear about what it is we actually want, but then two, learning how to effectively communicate with somebody else. And we're so used to working in our heads. And so we know what we want. We know what we're thinking. Figuring out how to communicate that information to somebody else in a way that resonates with them, it can be a bit of a challenge. On the other side of that learning curve, though, comes some freedom and some flexibility and the ability to be able to be even better than we already are. And so I would encourage everyone, just like Karissa is doing in this case with a VA, to figure out ways that you can delegate, whether it's a third-party company or hiring somebody in-house or having an intern or finding a VA or hiring Photographers Edit or whatever it might be. Figure out what you can delegate so that you can be the CEO of your company and ultimately build a business that's probably capable of way more than you're even doing right now. I love this inspiration, Karissa.
Yeah, and I think for anyone listening too, like I've been really fearful of having to pay somebody, I guess, to do things that I felt like I could just do myself.
Sure.
So I had to work through like, what is actually like, where is that fear actually coming from? And I realized that I didn't want to feel like, I don't want to have like a scarcity mindset with my money, if that makes sense. So
absolutely.
For anyone who feels like that, I just encourage you to kind of like dig deep and figure out like, what are you actually afraid of and how can you work past it? You know, because giving up $50 a week or whatever, like is worth it to me to have more freedom in my life and ultimately like more happiness, you know? So I think it's important to kind of work through those things and just don't be afraid.
Yeah, don't be afraid. I mean, that sums it up. And if you are afraid, figure out where that fear is coming from and address that. We have a tendency, and I've certainly been guilty of it, of saying, I feel this way or I am this way. And the reality is there's something behind that. Fear in many cases comes from lack of understanding or lack of context. And so developing a certain level of understanding, which will then enable, I mean, in this case, it might be just better understanding our numbers, our budget, what we're actually capable of affording to outsource or to delegate, will enable us to remove or minimize that sense or that feeling of fear and move forward, be able to actually take action. Which is really, really cool. So props to you for that. But I want to keep going too. Talk to me about inspiration. I mean, this is a word that comes up a good bit these days in the industry, directly or indirectly. But where do you find inspiration outside of photography? It's easy to scroll through the Instagram accounts of our fellow photographers, but are there other places that you find that inspiration?
Yeah, for sure. I'm going to try not to sound too cheesy, but I think I will be cheesy here, but it's true. Well, first and foremost, my faith is really important to me, but also my family. And I actually talk about this a good bit. Just my family really inspires me. And I mean, we're kind of going to get into it a little bit later, but I just know that I love my family so much. And I just try not to take any second with them for granted. As I mentioned, my husband's in the military and we have been apart a good bit in our relationship. And so actually getting to spend time with him and spend time with people in my family, I just really, really appreciate like each second that I have. And I just really try to soak it all in. And I'll talk about that a little bit later too with our conversation with capturing photos. But my family is where I draw a lot of inspiration. And then also just nature and traveling, which we also talked a little bit about. But I love to be outside. I could spend all my time outside. I love it so much. So anytime I'm feeling stressed or anything, I'm just like, okay, I just need to go outside.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And you talked about family.
Yeah.
You talked about the outdoors. How did those two elements of your life bring inspiration? How does that actually translate practically to your photography business?
Well, okay. So like I was talking about with my family, just not taking for granted the time I have with them. And I actually, like when I was apart from my husband, pictures actually played a really big role in my relationship. Just looking back at like happy memories, just like really kept me going through. And then as far as nature, like part of my brand position is delivering photos that are true to life and true to color. And that's because I think the world is so beautiful. Yeah. And I just really, I want to celebrate just how beautiful the world is. And I want that to come through in my photography, if that makes sense.
Well, and I have to say, your Instagram account is so vibrant. You talk about that color. And for everybody listening in, again, go to Karissa Layne Photo. We'll link to it in the show notes at bokehpodcast.com. But this Instagram feed, first of all, it has a wonderful variety to it. It doesn't feel so cookie cutter and, everything looks exactly the same. But it has this vibrance to it, which is really, really lovely. So you're definitely doing a wonderful job of depicting that color, that vibrance that is life.
Thank you. Yay.
So talk to me about a business or self-help book that you've read or listened to that you've found a lot of benefit in.
Yeah, I know you guys talk about building a story brand all the time, so I'm just going to ditto that and not go into it too much because it's talked about a lot.
Oh, it's
but
great,
I did read that, and ditto that book. But one that I wanted to talk about that I don't think ever has been mentioned is it's called The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry by John Mark Comer.
Wow, okay.
Yes, and I think you'd really like it, Nathan. There's also a podcast. So I haven't actually gotten through the whole book, but I have listened to the podcast. It's actually put out by Bridgetown, which is a church.
Okay.
And if you go to episode 347 of their podcast is where this series kind of starts. But it's all about how hurry is incompatible with love. That was a quote that I had pulled out that I feel like sums it up pretty well.
Okay. That's a pretty bold statement. I'm curious.
Yeah, well, you have to listen to it or read the book. Yeah, it's just talking about our culture and how we're so hurried and busy and distracted all the time.
Right.
He goes in a good bit into like technology and our phones and apps and stuff as well, which was really convicting for me when I was listening to it. But yeah, it's just about how to create margin in your life and to just slow down and be able to love people well and just kind of be purposeful in your life instead of just rushing around all the time, basically.
Yep.
So,
and tell me the name, the title of the book one more time.
Yeah, it's Ruthless Elimination of Hurry.
Wow, what a powerful title too. Okay, we'll link to that in the show notes. Again, bokehpodcast.com. For those of you listening in, if you don't take advantage of the show notes, you're missing out because there's just wonderful content there, summarization, links to resources from these episodes that Haley puts together. So just go to Bokeh, Bokeh podcast.com. Let's go to, this idea of emotion. Emotion, and I have to say, is one of my favorite things to capture. When I was a wedding photographer, engagement portrait photographer, I did a little bit of general portrait work, family work, and so forth as well. But I just love, as long as I had good light and a client that cared to kind of open up and put emotion out there, especially in the engagement with their significant other, I was a pretty happy dude. And yet I know that I could have done a better job of encouraging that emotion, the expression of that emotion, because as we talked about at the beginning of our conversation, many people are not comfortable expressing emotion in front of somebody that they don't know. And on top of that, they've got this camera pointing at them, and that's that much awkward, right? So I want to get into how you're able to capture this lovely emotion. Again, for everybody listening in, just go to Karissa's Instagram feed. You'll be able to see what I'm talking about. I want to better understand how you're approaching the portrait sessions or photographing weddings for that matter and getting this type of emotion. Just to begin with, though, what's the motivation for you in capturing that kind of emotion? What about it is inspiring to you?
So I touched on this a little bit earlier, but I think photos have the power to be so powerful. That makes sense. But yeah, I think that pictures can be more than just pictures. I think that they can be really real and can really come alive. And for me as a wedding photographer, I just really want my photos to be able to trigger just such joyful memories. I mean, your wedding day is like the best day of your life, and hopefully you're very joyful on your wedding day. So yeah, I want my photos to just be able to trigger those memories and those just joyful emotions. And I think in marriage, you will always go through hard times. I don't care who you are, there'll be hard times. And I think it is a powerful tool for you to look back on and actually be able to like see how you're feeling and how happy you are and how in love you are.
Yeah.
And that's really my motivation for trying to capture each couple's love as best I can.
So I mean, is this something that you naturally did from the very beginning, or is it something you kind of had to learn how to create, or not create, I guess, so much as just encourage from your subjects?
Yeah, so a little bit of both. I think I've always been pretty good about capturing pretty natural, fun photos. Like I've always hated like the stiff photos, smile at the camera.
Yeah.
So I've always been pretty good at it, but I have learned how to turn it into like fake, authentic emotion and actually
what
like
does that mean
real,
exactly?
authentic emotion. Okay, so I'm about to talk about this a little bit, but sometimes you could tell a couple like whisper your favorite cereals in her ear or something like that, and that's great sometimes, make him laugh, whatever. But to me, that's kind of like a fake, authentic emotion because there's no emotional attachment to that. There's no memory attached to that. It's just me telling him to whisper cereal in her ear or something. Does that make sense?
It does, yeah. I might use the word triggered, which I guess in some ways might have negative connotation in culture these days, but like when a triggered emotion, right? So you're giving them a trigger, which is encouraging emotion, because the reality is it's not fake. It actually is real emotion that's coming from someplace when they're making an association, right? So you say whisper your favorite cereal into her ear, whether they think it's just silly in general, or they're able to connect that with a personal experience or some memory tied to their relationship or whatever it is, they're making some type of an association which leads to actual emotion versus you just saying, smile at the camera.
Yeah.
So I would actually push back a little bit and give yourself a bit of a break. I don't think it's fake so much as just you're using a trigger, in this case, a positive one that encourages that emotion, which I think is great. But you said that that's something you've kind of learned how to do, or is that something you were able to do kind of from the get-go? I mean, you've got in fact, I was actually scrolling through your Instagram account and there's this picture of you, let's see, here it is, that you posted on December 1st of last year, and you're standing in this field of sunflowers with your camera, but your smile is so great. I mean, I would naturally smile in response to that smile. It seems very genuine, very kind, very heartfelt, very warm. So it seems like you just naturally create that environment anyway. But as far as the technique is concerned, was that learned?
Honestly, I don't think so. I think I've always kind of been able to create silly prompts and stuff to be able to capture emotion. I think, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there was never really, I think so. I feel like there was never really a certain point where I was like, it clicked for me and I like learned how, but like I said, I have gotten a lot better at it and I have learned with practice how to actually create real, authentic emotion and not just kind of like something silly, if that makes sense.
Well, you know what? Let's actually make this very practical and tangible for our listeners. I know you were about to share some techniques with our listeners that will more effectively enable them to encourage emotional expression by their clients. Will you just go ahead and share those with us now? Yes,
of course. So the first thing is just to get to know your clients, and before you even show up to meet them in person. One of the things, actually, going back to my brand position, I remember when I was looking for my own wedding photographer, I felt like a lot of times they would try to get to know you, but it would be pretty like surface level, like, what are your wedding colors? Like, I don't know, what's stuff like that. And I really try to dig deep and really, really get to know my couple, like who they are as a couple, what they love about each other, their favorite memories, what they like to do together, stuff like that actually allows me to get to know them better as a couple. And then always when I show up to a wedding, I take at least 10 minutes, sometimes longer, just to chat with them. And we'll just walk and talk and get to know each other better. And that makes a huge, huge difference.
Are you normally photographing an engagement session before a wedding, or in some cases you're not?
I try to, but not always. So sometimes if I don't get a chance to meet them before their wedding day, I try to FaceTime or something with them at least. But yeah.
That questionnaire that you're sending to them, or those questions that you're asking them, are you sending it in the form of a questionnaire? Are you asking them on that call or the FaceTime call? Is it a really long list? What does that actually look like?
So it's both. I chat with them and just ask personal questions, but then I do have a questionnaire that they actually can write out answers for me, where I really ask them deep questions. And sometimes that does allow them to open up a little bit because they might not feel so awkward. They can kind of think about it and write it down and send it back to me. So
that's true. Can you give an example of one of those deeper questions?
Oh yeah, I should have pulled it up. Let's see. I think I asked, what's your favorite thing about each other? What are you most looking forward to about being married? How did you meet? stuff like that.
Okay. So getting to know them, their relationship maybe more specifically in a bit more detailed manner, because you're right. If you skip straight to just conversation about the wedding and there is little personal interaction there, a lack of context, a lack of perspective that comes from that information, then you could be kind of short selling yourselves to that client's experience. So that's a really great reminder. Okay, so number one is to get to know the clients on a slightly deeper level. What's the next technique?
Yes. And actually, just really quick, going with number one as well, I just thought of this. I just wanted to emphasize it's also really important to allow them to get to know you. And one thing I always remember is you can't really expect people to be vulnerable with you if you're not willing to do the same. So it is important to tell them like what about your marriage or just about deep things about you as well. So that's important as well.
That's an interesting reminder. And that's something I've had to be reminded of just in general. My efforts at conversation, I love to create conversation and to go deep and ask other people questions. Not everyone tends to be a natural conversationalist. And so they won't necessarily ask me questions back. And so then it kind of feels weird to me that I like have to offer information about myself. And so I just don't, which probably doesn't help. Is there a way that you manage this?
Not necessarily. I mean, like I said, at the beginning of a shoot or a wedding or whatever, I just try to engage in conversation with them. Like I said, as long as I feel like I need, I try not to rush, just literally like if I'm having a shoot on the beach or something, we'll just walk and talk along the beach and we'll just get to know each other better. I don't know though. I guess I don't really have a good technique for that, but just casual conversation, I think helps a lot and helps them to feel like you're a friend and not just someone showing up with the camera to take their pictures.
Yeah. One technique I have found helpful, even actually in the other way around, creating conversation too, is listening to what somebody says and making some type of a connection with that thing.
Yeah, that's good.
And there's actually a late night talk show host. He's no longer on the air, and he's, shall we say, colorful, to say the least. Just a heads up to everybody. His name is Craig Ferguson. And I'm a bit obsessed with the guy's technique, his ability to, he kind of made this big deal out of ripping up the cue cards before he started an interview with whoever the celebrity guest, whoever the guest was that had come on. And he would just play off the other person in a way that I was, and still in a way I'm kind of jealous of. Like, I really want to be a better small talker, not for the sake of staying at surface level conversation, but just being able to help somebody feel comfortable and kind of play around and joke and have some fun. Because I tend to be a bit of an uptight conversationalist too. So I really appreciated and still do appreciate the way that he's able to play off of somebody. And he goes these kind of random directions, but he can literally pull a word or phrase out of something that somebody just said and ask them a question and response that, might even throw them off guard because it's kind of unrelated to the topic at hand. And they go a different direction in the conversation and they go a different direction. And even just making an effort to actually pay attention, to be able to make a connection with something that they said, and then use that as an opportunity to ask another question or to change the conversation, taking a different direction, can kind of encourage a better conversation, I think.
Yeah, that's good. I'll have to listen to that or watch that.
Well, and again, I emphasize with everybody, just a bit of a heads up. He is a little bit colorful in nature, shall we say, but it's really quite an interesting study in being a conversationalist, especially for those of you who feel like you're a bit more introverted in nature. It's certainly been a lesson for me. So just wanted to throw that out there. But so we're starting the first technique, doing a better job, kind of pulling that emotion from your clients. First of all, getting to know them. And getting to know them gives you context perspective that might better enable you to create those triggers that pulls the emotion out. But what's the next technique?
Okay, so number 2 is kind of going back to what I said earlier about prompting them to an emotion and not, instead of posing them, prompting them, I guess. So usually I will prompt them to, snuggle up super tight as if you hadn't seen each other in a month, and then, maybe spin around a little bit, maybe nibble on her ear, just anything that's kind of prompting them to do an action.
Okay.
And then what I'm actually doing is I'm not necessarily photographing each of those things, but I'm looking for in-between moments, in between them doing those prompts, I guess. So
yeah, so you're not so much prompting emotion as prompting the action, which then tends to trigger the emotion, which you're then trying to capture.
Yes,
I like
exactly.
That. Are you at that point? Are you using a longer lens to kind of zoom in on the emotion itself?
It depends. It depends. Sometimes that helps. It really just depends, honestly. I don't always have to. Like, for example, if I tell a couple to like snuggle up really tight and now spin around, I'm not even necessarily going to take pictures of them spinning around. But often what will happen is they'll spin around for a few minutes, they'll be laughing, and then they might stop and like look up at each other, and then they might hug each other tighter while they're still laughing or something like that, if that makes sense. So then I'm capturing that, the way that they're looking at each other, the way that they have a huge smile on their face. That's just an example, but that's what I'm really looking for. And a lot of times it takes a lot of observation.
Yes.
So every couple is so different too. Not every couple is going to react the same way.
Sure.
But I think that's what's fun is observing how each couple is so different and how like they look at each other, or sometimes after they kiss, a lot of times if you say, okay, pause, stay looking at each other, and just seeing the way that they look at each other after a kiss or before a kiss or something like that is really beautiful. So that's really what I'm looking for.
I like that. Okay, so prompt action, which I put in parentheses as I was taking notes here, which spurs emotion. Mm-hmm. And do you have you learned a variety of prompts over the years? Do you have a list that you regularly pull from? Like, do you keep them in the back of your mind? How do you do that?
Yes, actually, the third point I was going to say is that movement is super key. So I'll go ahead and answer that question while I dig into it. So usually I start out with a lot of movement. I'll have them just walk or even run, and this helps them just really loosen up. But usually if you have movement prompts, no matter what it is going to elicit emotion, because they're thinking about what they're supposed to be doing and not so much about how they look or am I standing okay or like whatever. So if they're walking, they're focusing on walking. If they're even if they're just standing still, if I say like sway her around, so maybe her hair will flow in the wind really pretty, or rub your hands on her back, or brush that piece of hair behind her ear or something like that. Now they're focusing on doing that and not so much feeling awkward, like how am I looking, is this okay? So I'm constantly like giving them things to do, and the movement is the key there. So
move them to distract them, huh?
Yeah, pretty much.
But I like that though. You're right. I mean, and it's funny how we can learn life lessons from even conversations like this. I mean, it's what we focus on is what we focus on. It's kind of interesting how easily distracted we can be. And yet it also is indicative of how whatever we give the attention to, that's where our mind will be. And so it's easy in that case to kind of forget about the camera, that person that you're not really familiar with trying to photograph you.
Yeah, exactly.
Because you're focused on that movement. That's really good. Yeah.
So to answer your question, usually I'll do kind of the same prompts over and over at every shoot, but I'll kind of run with whatever the couple gives me. So if a couple's really goofy and they love the laughing or running around, then I'll continue to kind of do that. Or if they really just love to be intimate and stare at each other or make out or whatever, then that's fine. And I'll run with that. So yeah, just kind of being flexible with what the couple gives you and then kind of like going with it. But usually I will start out with walking, running, playing maybe their first dance song, saying like practice dancing or something like that. And then I can watch to see how they interact as they're dancing. Okay. So that's usually something I'll always do.
Yeah, and you do kind of have to learn the way that each couple works together. They're certainly not all the same. I've had a range.
Yeah, for sure. Actually, another trick too. Sorry, I just thought of this as well.
Sure.
I'll tell them, okay, I'm gonna run way over there. I promise I'm not leaving. I'm just gonna run up there and get a super wide shot of the beautiful ocean or whatever. So you guys just stand there, chit chat, whatever, and I'll be right back.
Yeah.
And it's kind of I will take a wide picture for them, but it is kind of a sneaky technique where I'll literally just put my camera down and I'll just watch how they're interacting as I'm way backed up and see like what they're doing. How do they snuggle up together? Yeah. How are they naturally engaging in conversation? Are they laughing a lot and stuff like that? So that helps me too.
Oh, that's great. And I bet too that there might even be an opportunity as you're observing them to just pull that camera up and snap a couple of pictures.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And a lot of times I'll go back and be like, okay, so I was watching you and this thing that you did was so cute. So I'm just going to photograph you doing that. So just keep doing your thing. And even if I just tell them to continue talking, sometimes that creates beautiful photos as well. So
But the specificity of prompts, I think, is great, because that kind of general, okay, just stand over there and be natural, or do what you normally do. Like,
yeah, no, that's not going to work.
Very general, kind of arbitrary statements. They don't know what that means, what to make of that. Even if they know what they normally do, they're still very conscious of the fact that they're standing in front of the camera and this person they don't know very well. So giving them specific prompts, that's really important. Okay, so number 1, get to know the clients personally. Number 2, prompt action, which of course ultimately spurs emotion. Number 3, I'm going to sum it up by saying move them to distract them.
Yeah, that's good.
To photograph them if you want to finish that off. But what's number 4?
Number 4 is constant feedback.
Okay.
And I underline constant because I really mean it is constant. Like if you saw me, you'd probably think I'm crazy. Like, just to give an example, I'll be like, okay, why don't you put your arm around each other now? Start walking towards me. Look at each other. Oh, I love the way you were just looking at each other. Yep. Oh my goodness. Stay locked into each other. Oh my gosh, you look beautiful. Oh, your hair is blowing so beautifully. Oh, this is amazing. Like, that's how I am the whole shoot, constantly. So I never take a break in talking to them and giving them feedback. Like, that looks great. Maybe move your hands. This is beautiful. You guys look amazing. So on and so forth. And usually at the end of a shoot, that is like the number one thing they'll tell me is, we felt so comfortable. We felt like you were a hype woman. I love how you just were like yelling at us the whole time. So
but
that's key.
It's such a big deal. It is really key. I've seen, I think I mentioned this in the podcast, but you see this happen actually when you go to shooting workshops. And to be fair, shooting workshops, the context isn't quite the same, but you'll see, 5, 10 photographers lined up photographing this client, and nobody is saying anything. Or I say a client, but the model or the models, nobody's saying anything. They're dead quiet, or at least largely quiet. That feedback, even if it's a model, even if the model knows how to move, or these people know how to move in front of a camera, the feedback can create comfort. And you want the more comfortable environment, the more they're going to relax, the more raw the emotion and interaction. That feedback is so important. And you mentioned enthusiasm at the beginning of our conversation. And I think that's really important. When I say to somebody, that looks great. Oh my goodness, that interaction. Oh, that kiss was awesome. The way you were just standing. Any of these compliments, I'm not lying to them just to be a photographer and feed them some comments. I mean it. And the enthusiasm that goes along with that is going to come across to them. It's going to make a big difference. So I love that you bring this up. I love that your clients are realizing the significance of it and saying something to you. And I think this is a really important reminder for all of our listeners. I know you told me that you've got 5 techniques. So let's jump to that last one.
Okay, so this doesn't really make sense, but here's what I wrote down. Work quickly, but also slow down. So what I mean by that...
Do explain.
I know, it doesn't make sense. Very contradictory. But what I mean by that is kind of going along with number 4, it's kind of our responsibility to not allow there to be awkward moments or... Yeah, so I feel like I've learned how to give them a prompt, and then I am the one who can work around that. If you give them one single prompt or pose, if you will, you as the photographer can move around so much and capture so many different photos. Like you can get such a variety from just one simple thing. So I think it's really important to work quickly and not keep having to change them. Like, okay, we're going to do this. Okay, now let's do this. Okay, now let's do this, but kind of keep it flowing naturally. And I think at least I feel like it's my responsibility to keep the session flowing naturally by just continuing to photograph them. And then finally, when I feel like we need to change positions, then I'll prompt them to do so. But yeah, I snap a lot of photos. I kind of have to with my style, because when they're moving a lot and stuff, I do have to snap pretty quick, because sometimes they might make a goofy or weird face, but the next second they might make a really cute face. So that's the one I'm going to use. So I have to work quickly, but then I also think it's important to remember that you can slow down. You can take a break. You can chit chat for a while. You can tell them, like I said earlier, I'm going to back up and take a super wide shot. Sometimes I do that more than once. It's okay to take a break. I mean, sometimes getting your photos taken can be kind of stressful, and it's like, oh my gosh. So I think it's nice for them also to take a little break and just take a deep breath, and then we'll get back into it. And I have a conversation with my clients throughout the whole entire session. Like, I'll stop for a minute, put my camera down, and be like, so what'd you guys do today or whatever. And
Yeah.
I think that's super important to help them to continue to feel comfortable with you.
Yeah, you talked about minimizing that awkwardness, and that's, I mean, you can do that first of all by consistently communicating too. So there's not a ton of silence. Filling in that silence with genuine compliments and specific instruction, that's really important. But then I love that you bring this up, not being so frantic, going from one pose to the next.
Yeah.
There is even if you're frantic because you had too much caffeine or you're just excited about the shoot or whatever the thing is, that the frantic nature of that type of interaction can create a bit of unease. And so I like this. Work quickly, but slowly. I think it actually makes plenty of sense now as you explain it. And I think it's a really great reminder for our listeners too. Don't be so quick to rush through everything. Help them relax by not being so frantic. That's a wonderful, wonderful reminder. And these are great points of conversations and reminders and for myself and for our listeners as well. And I really appreciate you being willing to kind of share a little bit of how you're capturing. Again, I have to say these just beautiful images. I'm back on your Instagram account looking here as we're talking. Really, really lovely. We'll link to that and your website, by the way, for everybody listening in, Karissa Layne Photo, KarissALayne photo.com. We'll link to that and the same thing for Instagram, Karissa Layne Photo, in the show notes, bokehpodcast.com. And Karissa, thank you so much for hanging out with me and sharing a bit of your insight into the topic of capturing emotion today.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. Such an honor to be here.
Thank you so much for listening to the Bokeh Podcast. Will you let us know what you thought by leaving a review of the podcast in the Apple Podcast app? And I'd love to hear from you personally with your thoughts about the podcast and suggestions about future topics and guests for the show. My email is nathan@photographersedit.com. The Bokeh Podcast is brought to you by Milu, the simplest way for photographers and coordinators to collaborate on shot lists and timelines for weddings, parties, and other amazing events. Visit Milu, MIILU.com. This podcast is also brought to you by Photographer's Edit, custom image editing for the professional photographer. Visit photographersedit.com.